I'm Lucy, and I'm 27. 3 weeks ago, my father handed the keys to Sterling Construction to my 25-year-old brother David during Christmas dinner. I got a leather-bound planner and a speech about how I'm too valuable to lose to the stress of ownership. I smiled, hugged everyone, and walked out into the snow. That night, I started planning the most calculated revenge in family business history. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt undervalued by your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me take you back to how this whole disaster started. Sterling Construction wasn't just some random family business. I'd been bleeding for it since I was 14 years old. While other kids were at soccer practice, I was learning to read blueprints and calculate material costs. Not because I had to, but because I genuinely loved seeing projects come together from nothing. Dad started Sterling in his garage 15 years ago after getting laid off from Morrison & Associates. Those early years were brutal. Long days, tight budgets, and the constant fear that one bad project could sink everything. I became his unofficial partner, handling paperwork and client calls while he focused on the actual construction work. By the time I graduated high school, Sterling was growing faster than Dad could manage alone. College felt like a luxury we couldn't afford, so I enrolled in business classes at the community college while working full-time. Marketing, accounting, project management, whatever Sterling needed, I learned. For 9 years, I poured everything into that company. I developed our quality control systems, built relationships with every major supplier in the city, and personally managed client communications that kept us booked solid even during the recession. Our client retention rate hit 93% largely because I treated every project like my reputation depended on it. David, meanwhile, was finding himself at various colleges on Dad's dime. Engineering lasted 1 semester. Business made it through freshman year before he decided entrepreneurship was too limiting. Then communications, graphic design, and finally a brief stint studying something called digital innovation that cost $40,000 and produced exactly 0 applicable skills. The family dynamic was always crystal clear, even if nobody said it out loud. David was the heir apparent, the future CEO who'd lead Sterling into greatness. I was the reliable daughter, the one who'd always be there to keep things running smoothly while he figured out his vision. When David's ready to settle down, you two will make quite a team, Dad would tell clients, as if my 9 years of experience were just preparation for my brother's eventual leadership. Last summer, Dad finally convinced David to join the company full-time. Learn the business from the ground up, he said. David lasted exactly 18 days on construction sites before Dad moved him to the office, citing better utilization of his natural talents. Those talents apparently consisted of charming clients over lunch while I handled the actual project details, coming up with innovative ideas that usually involved spending money we didn't have, and somehow managing to take credit for strategies I'd developed months earlier. The warning signs started in October. Dad began having private meetings with David, conversations that stopped abruptly whenever I entered the room. Legal documents appeared on Dad's desk, succession planning templates, corporate restructuring papers, tax implications of family business transfers. Then came the Meridian Properties disaster. I'd spent 3 weeks developing a proposal for a mixed-use development worth $2.8 million. The morning of the presentation, Dad announced that David would be handling it instead. Leadership opportunity, Dad explained, like I was supposed to be grateful that my work was becoming my brother's sum builder. The meeting was painful to watch. David stumbled through sections he didn't understand, couldn't answer basic questions about material costs, and somehow quoted a timeline that was both unrealistic and unprofitable. We lost the contract to Morrison & Associates, Dad's old company. Learning experience, Dad said afterward, like $3 million was tuition money. November brought more private meetings, more documents I wasn't invited to review, and clients asking me strange questions like, "Will you still be handling our account after the changes?" They knew something I was pretending not to understand. The final piece fell into place 2 weeks before Christmas when I found a draft press release on Dad's computer. Sterling Construction announces new leadership. The document outlined David's extensive experience and innovative vision without mentioning my name once. That Christmas dinner wasn't a surprise. It was just the public confirmation of decisions that had been made months earlier, in meetings I wasn't allowed to attend. But here's what Dad never understood about those 9 years I'd spent supporting the team. I hadn't just been answering phones and filing papers. I'd been learning every single aspect of how Sterling worked, building relationships with clients who trusted me personally, and developing expertise that had nothing to do with the Sterling name. I'd also been paying attention to Sterling's weaknesses, the inefficiencies Dad ignored, and the opportunities we missed because David was too inexperienced to recognize them, and Dad was too stubborn to change. So when I walked out of that Christmas dinner with my leather planner, I wasn't just angry. I was armed with 9 years of insider knowledge and a very clear understanding of exactly how to compete with the company that had just told me I wasn't good enough to inherit. You know what's funny about planning revenge? The hardest part isn't figuring out what to do. It's having the patience to do it right. I spent the week between Christmas and New Year's researching every aspect of starting a construction consulting firm, and let me tell you, the legal landscape is more complicated than Dad ever let on. First challenge, the non-compete clause buried in my employment contract. I'd signed it 5 years ago without really reading the fine print, back when I still believed loyalty and hard work would be rewarded with partnership. The clause prohibited me from working for any competing construction company within a 50-mile radius for a period of 2 years. Fortunately, the contract defined competing companies as those providing general construction services, which left a loophole big enough to drive a truck through. Consulting services, project management, and quality control oversight weren't specifically mentioned. I scheduled a meeting with Patricia Webb, the employment attorney who'd handled Sterling's contracts for years. Yes, it was awkward asking Dad's lawyer to help me potentially compete with Dad's company, but Patricia was nothing if not professional. The non-compete is enforceable for direct construction work, she explained, reviewing my contract, but consulting and project management services exist in a gray area. As long as you're not bidding against Sterling for construction contracts, you should be legally protected. What about client relationships? Can I contact Sterling's existing clients? That's where it gets tricky. You can't solicit Sterling's active clients directly, but if they approach you independently, that's different. And clients Sterling has lost or turned down are fair game. Perfect. I wasn't planning to steal Sterling's clients anyway. I was planning to serve the clients Sterling couldn't handle competently. The next step was understanding the financial reality of starting a consulting firm. Commercial general liability insurance would cost $8,000 annually. Business licensing and bonding requirements would run another $4,000. Office space, basic equipment, and initial marketing. I was looking at roughly $50,000 in startup costs before landing my first contract. I had $78,000 in savings. Money I'd accumulated over years of living modestly while reinvesting every bonus back into Sterling's growth. Ironic that Sterling's success had inadvertently funded my escape plan. But money was just the beginning. The real challenge would be establishing credibility as an independent consultant, rather than Sterling's former employee. I needed clients who would value my expertise enough to pay premium rates for it. That's when I remembered the conversation I'd overheard at last year's Construction Industry Association dinner. Bill Harrison from Pinnacle Financial had been complaining about cost overruns and timeline delays on their office renovation project. The contractor they'd hired had underbid to win the job, then tried to make up profits by cutting corners and padding invoices. What we really need, Bill had said, is someone who can manage contractors from the client side. Someone who understands construction well enough to catch problems before they become expensive disasters. At the time, I'd filed that comment away as interesting but irrelevant. Now it looked like a business model. I spent New Year's Day creating a detailed business plan for Sterling Project Solutions. Yes, I was keeping the Sterling name, partly because it carried weight in the local market, and partly because I'd earned the right to use it after 9 years of building the reputation it represented. The service model was elegant in its simplicity. I wouldn't compete directly with construction companies. Instead, I'd work for property owners who needed expert oversight of their construction projects. Quality control, timeline management, budget oversight, and contractor coordination, all the services that Sterling provided for its own clients, but delivered from the client's perspective. My first target was obvious: Meridian Properties. They'd been burned by Sterling's incompetence and were probably gun-shy about hiring local contractors, but they still needed quality projects delivered on schedule and within budget. I called Jim Meridian on January 3rd, the first business day of the new year. Jim, this is Lucy Sterling from Sterling Construction. Do you have a few minutes to discuss some consulting services that might interest Meridian Properties? Lucy, I thought you were with Sterling Construction. I was. I'm launching an independent consulting firm that specializes in project management and quality control oversight. Based on our conversation after the presentation difficulties last fall, I thought you might be interested in discussing how these services could benefit your future projects. The careful phrasing was important. I wasn't criticizing Sterling directly or soliciting their business inappropriately. I was offering services that Sterling couldn't provide and referencing problems that were already public knowledge. That's interesting timing. Can we meet this week? We met 2 days later at a coffee shop downtown. Jim explained that Meridian was planning 3 major projects over the next 18 months, but had concerns about local contractors after their recent experiences. What we need, he said, is someone who can manage the entire process from our perspective. Someone who understands construction well enough to catch problems early and experienced enough to keep projects on schedule. That's exactly what I do. Project management and quality oversight from the property owner's perspective, ensuring contractors deliver what they promise when they promise it. And you can do this independently? No conflicts with Sterling Construction? My services don't compete with Sterling's construction work. If anything, they make contractors like Sterling more accountable, which benefits everyone. By the end of our meeting, I had my first consulting contract. A $200,000 office renovation project with a management fee of $12,000. Not enough to sustain a business long term, but proof that the concept worked. The second opportunity came from an unexpected source, Rebecca Martinez at Morrison & Associates. Apparently, word was already spreading about my departure from Sterling, and Morrison was dealing with their own project management challenges. "We're excellent at construction," Rebecca explained during our phone conversation, "but we sometimes struggle with client communication and expectation management. Would you be interested in consulting on that aspect of our projects?" Morrison wanted to hire Sterling's former project manager to handle the client relations they'd never mastered. The irony was delicious, but the opportunity was legitimate. A 6-month contract worth $25,000 to help Morrison implement better client communication systems. 3 weeks after walking out of Christmas dinner, I had 2 signed consulting contracts worth $37,000 and meetings scheduled with 4 additional potential clients. But I still hadn't formally resigned from Sterling Construction, because I wanted to see how Dad and David would handle my absence first. The thing about family businesses is that they reveal people's true priorities when the pressure gets high enough. I was about to discover exactly where I ranked in the Sterling family hierarchy, and the answer was going to determine how far I was willing to go with my revenge plan. I'd been officially sick for a week, letting Dad and David handle Sterling's day-to-day operations without my usual backstopping. The results were even more dramatic than I had expected. Day 1. David called 3 times, asking where I kept the supplier contact information. Apparently, 9 years of relationship building had left him completely dependent on my organizational systems. Day 2. Mrs. Patterson from the Riverside office complex called my personal phone because David couldn't answer basic questions about the warranty timeline for their HVAC installation. Day 3. Dad called asking if I knew why Morrison & Associates had canceled their meeting about potential subcontracting opportunities. I didn't mention that Rebecca had called me directly to discuss consulting arrangements instead. By day 5, David was leaving increasingly panicked voicemails about client complaints, missed deadlines, and supplier payment issues that he couldn't locate in our filing system. "Lucy, I need you to come in," his last message said. "Even if you're sick, can you at least walk me through where you keep the project status reports? The bank is asking questions about the Harrison project timeline, and I can't find any documentation." The Harrison project. My most recent success story, a commercial renovation that had come in 2 weeks early and 8% under budget because I'd negotiated better supplier terms and caught a structural issue before it became expensive. David couldn't even find the files that documented how I'd saved Sterling $15,000. That's when I decided it was time for the conversation I'd been postponing. I walked into Sterling's office on Friday morning to find David at my desk, frantically searching through filing cabinets while Dad paced behind him looking increasingly agitated. "Thank God you're feeling better," Dad said. "We've been drowning without you." "Actually, I'm feeling much better. Clear-headed, you might say. Clear enough to make some important decisions about my future." I handed Dad my formal resignation letter, watching his expression shift from relief to confusion to something approaching panic. "Lucy, what is this about? If this is because of Christmas dinner, we can discuss adjusting your role. Maybe profit sharing." "Dad, this isn't about Christmas dinner. This is about recognizing that I've outgrown my role here at Sterling." "Outgrown?" David looked up from the filing cabinet. "Lucy, we need you. This week has been a disaster without your organizational systems." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before deciding I wasn't leadership material." I could have been diplomatic, should have been diplomatic. Instead, I told them the truth about what I'd accomplished during my week of illness. I've spent the past week establishing my own consulting firm. I already have 2 signed contracts worth $37,000 and meetings scheduled with 4 additional clients who are interested in project management services. The silence that followed was profound. Dad sank into his chair like someone had punched him in the stomach. David just stared at me with his mouth open. "You're starting a competing business?" Dad's voice carried disbelief and betrayal. "I'm starting a consulting business that serves property owners who need expert project oversight. It doesn't compete with Sterling's construction services. It makes contractors like Sterling more accountable." "Lucy, you can't do this to us," David said. "You know how much we depend on your experience." "You depend on my labor, David. There's a difference." Dad recovered enough to shift into negotiation mode. What would it take to keep you at Sterling? Partnership? Equity stake? I'll put it in writing this time. Dad. 6 months ago, that offer would have meant everything to me. Now it feels like too little. Too late. So you're just going to abandon the company you helped build? I'm not abandoning anything. I'm taking the expertise I developed here and using it to build something of my own. The conversation continued for another hour, cycling through offers, counteroffers, and increasingly desperate attempts to convince me to stay. Dad even suggested making me president while David learned the business, though the details made it clear he'd still be the owner. But the most revealing moment came when David asked the question that exposed everything wrong with their thinking. Can't you do your consulting work part-time and still help us with Sterling's operations? After 9 years of 60-hour weeks, after building the systems that kept Sterling profitable, after developing the client relationships that sustained their business, David's solution was for me to work even more hours to accommodate his limitations. That's when I understood that this wasn't really about family or loyalty or recognizing my contributions. It was about Dad and David's inability to imagine Sterling Construction without my unpaid overtime subsidizing their incompetence. David, here's what's going to happen. I'm giving you 2 weeks' notice, which is more than Sterling gave me when you decided I wasn't worth inheriting this company. I'll spend that time transitioning my active projects and organizing the files you couldn't find this week. And after that? Dad asked. After that, you get to discover what Sterling Construction looks like when it's actually run by the people who own it. I gathered my personal items and prepared to leave, then paused at the door. There was one more thing they needed to understand. By the way, Meridian Properties called me directly yesterday. They want to discuss having me manage their next project, the retail complex on 5th Street that Sterling bid on last month. Dad's face went white. The 5th Street project was worth $1.2 million. Exactly the kind of contract Sterling needed to maintain their growth trajectory. You're going after our clients now? Meridian isn't your client, Dad. You lost that relationship when David couldn't answer basic questions about material costs. I'm just providing services that Sterling apparently can't. 2 weeks later, I cleaned out my desk and handed Dad the keys to the filing cabinets that contained 9 years of my organizational systems. David looked terrified. Dad looked angry. And me? I looked like someone who was finally ready to find out what she could build without anyone else's permission. Have you ever experienced that moment when you realize you've been holding yourself back to make other people comfortable? That's exactly what I felt walking out of Sterling Construction for the last time, carrying a box of personal items and a very clear understanding of exactly how much they were going to miss me. Starting your own business sounds romantic until you're sitting in a dingy office space at 7 a.m., wondering if you've made the biggest mistake of your life. But sometimes the best decisions feel terrifying right up until they start working. My new office was a far cry from Sterling's established headquarters. 600 square feet on the second floor of a converted warehouse, with fluorescent lighting that hummed constantly and a view of the parking lot behind Murphy's Auto Repair. The rent was $800 a month, which seemed manageable until I calculated how many consulting hours I'd need to cover overhead. But it was mine. Every filing cabinet, every phone call, every decision about how to spend my time, completely under my control for the first time in 9 years. The first month was a masterclass in business reality versus business planning. The Meridian project started smoothly enough, but their expectations were higher than I'd anticipated. Instead of the 12 hours per week I'd estimated, I was spending nearly 25 hours coordinating between contractors, reviewing progress reports, and attending on-site meetings. Lucy, we need you to check the electrical work in Building A, Jim would call at 6 p.m. on Fridays. The inspector found some code violations that need immediate attention. Code violations meant emergency meetings with electrical contractors, revised timelines, and budget adjustments that required approval from Meridian's board. What I'd priced as simple oversight was becoming complex problem-solving that consumed entire weekends. The Morrison & Associates contract presented different challenges. Their client communication issues were deeper than surface-level project updates. They'd developed a reputation for quality work but poor customer service, leaving property owners feeling ignored and uninformed. Our clients love the finished projects, Rebecca explained during our first working meeting, but they hate the process of getting there. We need systems that keep them informed without overwhelming our project managers. I developed weekly progress reports, standardized client communication schedules, and contractor accountability metrics that Morrison could implement across all their projects. The work was satisfying but time-intensive, requiring me to understand Morrison's internal operations well enough to design sustainable improvements. 3 months in, I was earning enough to cover expenses but working 70-hour weeks for what amounted to slightly above minimum wage when I calculated my actual hourly rate. The independence was intoxicating, but the financial reality was sobering. That's when I learned my first major lesson about consulting. Pricing projects based on estimated time is a recipe for poverty. I needed to price based on value delivered, not hours worked. The lesson came courtesy of Tom Bradley, a property developer who'd heard about my work through Morrison's network. Tom was dealing with a construction project that was 6 weeks behind schedule and $40,000 over budget due to poor contractor management. "I don't care how many hours you spend fixing this," he said during our initial meeting. "I need someone who can get this project back on track before it becomes a complete disaster. What's that worth to you?" I quoted him $15,000 to assess the situation and develop a recovery plan. Tom agreed immediately, which told me I'd probably underpriced the service. But more importantly, it demonstrated that clients would pay premium rates for expertise that solved expensive problems. The troubled project turned out to be a perfect showcase for my capabilities. The contractor had been padding invoices, using substandard materials, and ignoring basic quality control procedures. I identified 17 specific issues that were driving costs and delays, negotiated corrections with the contractor, and brought the project back on schedule within 3 weeks. Tom was so impressed that he immediately hired me for 2 additional projects and referred me to 3 other developers who were dealing with similar contractor management issues. By month 6, I had 7 active clients and a waiting list of projects. The dingy office that had seemed spacious was now cramped with filing cabinets, project plans, and the constant activity of a legitimate business operation. More importantly, I was developing a reputation in the local construction community. Not as Sterling Construction's former employee, but as Lucy Sterling, the consultant who could solve problems that other people couldn't handle. The validation felt incredible, but it also created new challenges. Success was generating more opportunities than I could handle alone, which meant either turning down profitable work or finding ways to expand my capacity. I chose expansion, hiring Sarah Martinez as my first employee. Sarah was a project coordinator with 5 years of experience who'd been laid off when her previous company downsized during a construction industry slump. She understood the technical aspects of project management and had client communication skills that complemented my expertise. "I can handle the day-to-day coordination," Sarah explained during her interview, "which would free you up to focus on problem-solving and business development." Exactly what I needed. Sarah's salary was $36,000 annually, a significant expense that would require maintaining consistent project flow to justify. But her first week convinced me I'd made the right decision. While I was meeting with potential clients and handling complex technical issues, Sarah was managing contractor schedules, coordinating material deliveries, and maintaining the detailed documentation that kept projects organized and clients informed. Within 2 months of hiring Sarah, I was able to take on 3 additional clients without sacrificing quality or working unsustainable hours. My average project value increased from $8,000 to $15,000 as I focused on more complex consulting assignments. But the real breakthrough came in month 9, when everything I'd learned about pricing, client relationships, and market positioning converged in one opportunity that would define the next phase of my business. Jim Meridian called me on a Tuesday afternoon with a proposition that initially sounded impossible. "Lucy, we want you to manage our entire Riverside Phase 2 development. Not just oversight or coordination, but full project management from permits to final occupancy." Riverside Phase 2 was an $8 million mixed-use development. Shopping, office space, and residential units on 20 acres of prime real estate. The kind of project that could establish a small consulting firm as a legitimate player in commercial development. "Jim, I appreciate the confidence, but that's beyond my current capacity. I don't have the infrastructure to manage something that size. That's why we're proposing a partnership arrangement. Meridian handles financing and overall development oversight. You handle day-to-day project management and construction coordination. We split the management fees 60-40. 60-40 in Meridian's favor, but 40% of an $8 million project was still substantial money, more than I'd make in 2 years of traditional consulting, and the kind of success that would transform my small firm into a legitimate development company. There was just one problem. Managing a project that size would require partnering with an established construction company that had the infrastructure and bonding capacity to handle the actual building work. And there was really only one local company that fit those requirements. You know what they say about karma? Sometimes it's subtle, working behind the scenes to balance cosmic ledgers. Other times it shows up at your office wearing a Sterling Construction polo shirt and looking like it hasn't slept in weeks. David appeared at my door on a Thursday morning in late September, 9 months after I'd walked out of Sterling Construction. He looked terrible, thinner, stressed, and carrying the unmistakable weight of someone who'd been learning hard lessons about business ownership the expensive way. "Lucy, We need to talk. No pleasantries, no small talk. Just exhaustion and desperation delivered with the kind of raw honesty that suggested he'd run out of alternatives. What can I do for you, David? Sterling's in trouble. Real trouble. We've lost 3 major contracts in the past 4 months, our cash flow is inconsistent, and our reputation— He shook his head. We're getting a lot of feedback about project management issues. I wasn't surprised. The construction industry was small enough that word traveled fast when a company started delivering poor results. Sterling's problems had been visible to anyone paying attention. What kind of project management issues? Timeline delays, communication breakdowns, budget overruns. The Riverside office addition that you'd managed the initial planning for? We finished it 6 weeks late and $28,000 over budget. The Riverside project had been my baby. I'd negotiated the contracts, established supplier relationships, and created detailed timelines that should have made delays impossible. For Sterling to botch it, that badly meant fundamental management failures. David, I'm sorry to hear about Sterling's difficulties, but I'm not sure what you want from me. Advice? Maybe, or— He hesitated, clearly struggling with what he'd come to ask. Maybe you'd consider working with us again? As a consultant or partner? Whatever arrangement makes sense? There it was. The request I'd been expecting since starting my own firm, delivered 9 months later than it would have mattered. What does Dad think about that idea? David's expression told me everything about Dad's opinion. He's not thrilled, but he understands our situation. We need help, Lucy. Professional help from someone who understands Sterling's operations. That's interesting timing, David, because I just received an opportunity that might benefit both our companies. I explained the Meridian partnership offer, watching David's eyes widen as he absorbed the scope and implications of an $8 million development project. Lucy, that's huge. That's the biggest opportunity in the city this year. Exactly. And I'm considering offering Sterling the opportunity to be the primary contractor, provided certain conditions are met. I outlined my requirements. Sterling would handle construction work under my project management oversight. David would manage crew coordination and daily operations, but all major decisions would require my approval. Profits would be split based on contribution. Meridian 40%, my firm 35%, Sterling 25%. 25%? David sounded disappointed. Sterling would be doing most of the actual construction work. Sterling would be doing construction work under my management and Meridian's financing. Without my oversight and their capital, Sterling wouldn't even be considered for a project this size. The truth was obvious, but difficult for David to accept. Sterling's recent performance record made them a liability for major projects. Meridian would never trust them with $8 million without someone else managing the details. What guarantees do we have that this partnership would work long-term? You have my commitment that this arrangement applies to the Riverside project only. After completion, we evaluate whether to continue working together based on results. I wasn't offering to rebuild Sterling Construction or rescue David from his management challenges. I was proposing a business arrangement that could benefit all parties if everyone performed their roles competently. I need to discuss this with Dad before making any commitments. Of course, take your time. But David, I leaned forward slightly. This offer depends on Sterling demonstrating they can follow project specifications and timelines without the management issues you've been experiencing. I won't risk my reputation or client relationships to subsidize ongoing incompetence. David left looking both hopeful and terrified, probably because he understood exactly what this opportunity represented. Sterling's last chance to participate in major commercial development. The conversation with Dad happened 3 days later, in my office with David serving as intermediary. Dad was polite but clearly uncomfortable with the reversed power dynamic. Lucy, I appreciate you considering Sterling for this project, but 35% seems high for project management services. Dad, project management for an $8 million development isn't just scheduling and coordination. It's risk management, quality control, timeline accountability, and client relations. Services that Sterling apparently struggles with independently. We've had some challenges recently, but you've had expensive failures that damaged relationships with major clients. The Riverside project alone probably cost you referrals worth $500,000. The assessment was harsh but accurate. Sterling's reputation had suffered enough that they were competing primarily on price rather than quality, which meant shrinking profit margins on smaller projects. So what exactly are you proposing? A partnership where Sterling provides construction capabilities while my firm handles project management and client relations. Sterling gets access to major projects they couldn't secure independently. My firm gets construction capacity for larger developments. Dad was quiet for several minutes, probably calculating whether 25% of $8 million was better than 100% of the smaller projects Sterling could still win. What happens if this doesn't work out? If Sterling can't meet your project management standards? Then we terminate the partnership and Sterling finds other opportunities. But Dad, if this does work out, it establishes a model that could benefit both companies for years. The arrangement we finally agreed to was more detailed than my initial proposal. Sterling would handle all construction work according to specifications I developed. David would manage daily operations and crew coordination. I would handle client relations, progress reporting, and quality control oversight. Most importantly, all major project decisions would require unanimous agreement between Sterling, my firm, and Meridian. Nobody could make expensive mistakes that affected other partners. 2 weeks later, we submitted a joint proposal to Meridian Properties for the Riverside Phase 2 development. The proposal combined Sterling's construction capabilities with my project management expertise under Meridian's development vision. Jim Meridian's response was immediate and enthusiastic. This is exactly what we were hoping for. Proven construction quality with professional project management oversight. We were awarded the contract on a Friday afternoon in October, almost exactly 10 months after I'd walked out of Sterling Construction with a leather planner and wounded pride. But standing in the conference room where we signed the partnership agreements, I didn't feel vindicated or triumphant. I felt like a businesswoman who'd successfully identified an opportunity that benefited all stakeholders. The scared, angry daughter who'd left Christmas dinner was gone. In her place was someone who understood that the best revenge isn't making other people fail. It's succeeding so completely that their opinion of your potential becomes irrelevant. Sometimes the universe has perfect timing. The Riverside Phase 2 groundbreaking ceremony was scheduled for December 15th, exactly 1 year after the Christmas dinner that had changed everything. Standing at the podium as project manager, introducing a team that included the mayor, Meridian's board of directors, and about 60 other people who mattered in local development, I couldn't help but appreciate the symmetry. This development represents exactly the kind of collaborative partnership that creates sustainable economic growth, I told the crowd. Quality construction, professional management, and community investment working together to build something that benefits everyone. Dad and David were in the audience, along with Mom and several other family members who'd driven over to watch the daughter they'd underestimated manage an $8 million project. The expression on Dad's face was complicated, pride mixed with confusion and maybe a hint of regret about how long it had taken him to recognize what I was capable of. But the real validation had come 2 weeks earlier, when the preliminary project numbers confirmed what I'd known since starting my consulting firm. I was actually good at this. Riverside Phase 2 was tracking ahead of schedule and under budget. Not because Sterling had suddenly become more competent, but because proper project management prevented the small problems that typically became expensive disasters. Lucy, this is the smoothest major project we've managed in 5 years, Jim Meridian had told me during our monthly review meeting. Your oversight systems are catching issues before they impact timelines or budgets. The success was creating opportunities I hadn't anticipated. Morrison & Associates had approached me about a long-term consulting arrangement. 2 other development companies wanted to discuss project management partnerships. Even the city planning office had inquired about my availability for public works projects. But the most surprising conversation came from an unexpected source. Tom Bradley, the developer whose troubled project had established my reputation for fixing construction disasters. Lucy, I've been following your work on Riverside, and I have a proposition that might interest you. Tom's development company was expanding operations to include property management and construction oversight services. They wanted to establish a project management division that could handle developments from conception through completion. We want you to head that division. Full autonomy, unlimited budget for personnel and equipment, and equity participation in all projects you manage. It was an offer that would make me wealthy within a few years and establish me as one of the most powerful people in regional development. Everything I'd worked toward since leaving Sterling, handed to me by someone who understood exactly what my expertise was worth. Tom, that's incredibly generous, but I'm not interested. He looked genuinely surprised. Can I ask why? Because I already have exactly what I want. My own company, my own decisions, my own successes and failures. Working for your company, even with autonomy and equity, would still mean building someone else's vision. And independence matters more than financial security? I thought about that question seriously, considering everything that had brought me to this point. A year ago, security was all I wanted. Now I understand that security without independence isn't actually secure at all. Tom nodded thoughtfully. The offer stands if you change your mind, but I respect your position. That conversation clarified something I'd been thinking about for months. My goals had evolved beyond simply proving myself to Dad and David. I was building something that could outlast family dynamics and personal validation needs. The success was also creating new challenges. Managing Riverside while maintaining my other consulting clients was requiring longer hours than I'd worked even at Sterling. Sarah was handling day-to-day coordination brilliantly, but I needed additional help to manage the growing workload. I think we should hire Mike Thompson, Sarah suggested during one of our weekly planning meetings. He's got 8 years of quality control experience, and he's looking for something more challenging than basic project inspection. Mike had been doing freelance quality control work for several local contractors, but his attention to detail and technical knowledge would be perfect for the comprehensive oversight our clients expected. What's he looking for in terms of compensation and responsibilities? $42,000 annually, plus performance bonuses tied to project success metrics. He wants to be part of building something, rather than just inspecting other people's work. I hired Mike the following week, giving Sterling Project Solutions its third full-time employee and the capacity to handle multiple major projects simultaneously. But the real milestone came in late November, when I had to make a decision that would define the future direction of my company. Jim Meridian called with news about a development opportunity in Atlanta. A mixed-use complex similar to Riverside but worth $15 million, with a developer who specifically wanted me as project manager after tracking our success. Lucy, they're offering a management contract that would be the most profitable project you've ever handled, but it would require relocating to Atlanta for approximately 18 months. Atlanta, $15 million, the kind of opportunity that could establish my firm as a national player in commercial development. Jim, that's an incredible opportunity, but I'm not interested in relocating. You wouldn't have to relocate permanently. Maybe 6 months a year in Atlanta during active construction phases. The rest of your time here managing regional projects. National expansion. I'd never seriously considered operating outside our regional market, but the Atlanta opportunity would transform my small consulting firm into something much bigger. What's their timeline for a decision? They need an answer by January 15th. And Lucy? The management fee would be more than you've earned in the past 2 years combined. That night, I sat in my office reviewing financial projections for national expansion. The numbers were compelling, but the real question wasn't about money. It was about vision. Did I want to continue building a regional consulting firm that served local clients well? Or did I want to create a national company that could compete with major players in commercial development? The decision would determine not just my business strategy, but my entire approach to success and independence. And I had exactly 6 weeks to figure out what kind of company I wanted to build with the skills and reputation I'd developed since walking away from Sterling Construction. As I drove home through streets I'd traveled thousands of times as Sterling's invisible project manager, I reflected on how much had changed in 12 months. The angry, scared woman who'd left Christmas dinner with a leather planner was gone, replaced by someone who understood the difference between being valuable to other people and being valuable to yourself. Tomorrow, I'd continue managing the most successful project of my career. Next month, I'd decide whether to expand nationally or continue growing regionally. But tonight, I was grateful for the lesson I'd learned about building something entirely your own, rather than hoping other people would recognize what you'd built for them. The problem with success is that it attracts the kind of attention you're not always prepared to handle. I learned this lesson the hard way in January of my second year, when a phone call from Rebecca Martinez at Morrison & Associates revealed just how complicated the construction industry's politics could become. Lucy, we have a situation that requires delicate handling, a project that's become too politically complicated for us to manage directly, but too valuable to abandon. Morrison had been selected to complete a corporate headquarters for Pinnacle Financial after the previous contractor, Sterling Construction, had been fired for foundation work that failed inspection. The project was worth $6 million, but Sterling was threatening legal action, claiming the foundation problems existed before they took over. Here's the problem, Rebecca explained during our meeting. Pinnacle wants to sue Sterling for the defective work. Sterling is claiming they inherited the problems from the previous contractor. Meanwhile, we have a half-built headquarters that's costing everyone money every day it sits unfinished. Morrison needed an independent consultant who could assess the situation objectively and recommend solutions that would keep the project moving forward. Someone with no financial stake in the blame game, but enough credibility to make recommendations all parties would accept. The irony was perfect. Sterling's incompetence had created a situation that required Sterling's former project manager to clean up the mess. What's your assessment timeline? 2 weeks for preliminary findings, another 2 weeks for detailed recommendations. We're offering $60,000 for the complete analysis. I accepted the contract, partly because Morrison was a valuable client, and partly because I was curious to see exactly how badly Sterling had botched a project I would have managed differently. The foundation problems were worse than Rebecca had indicated. Not just poor workmanship, but fundamental structural deficiencies that suggested David had approved subcontractors without proper vetting or oversight. Concrete mixture ratios that didn't meet load requirements, reinforcement bar placement that violated building codes, and drainage systems that would fail within 5 years. My report identified 23 separate code violations and structural deficiencies. The remediation would cost approximately $300,000 and delay the project by at least 3 months. More critically, my analysis clearly established that these problems originated during Sterling's phase of construction. The day I submitted my findings, Dad called. "Lucy, I heard you're working against us on the Pinnacle project." His tone carried hurt and accusation, like I'd betrayed some family loyalty by providing objective technical analysis. "I'm consulting for Morrison on structural assessment. If my findings hurt Sterling's legal position, that's because Sterling created the problems I documented. You're helping them build a case that could bankrupt us." "Dad, I'm documenting construction defects that already exist. Sterling created this situation through poor quality control and inadequate supervision." The conversation deteriorated quickly, ending with Dad accusing me of sabotaging the family business, and me pointing out that Sterling had sabotaged itself through incompetent management. But the real drama started 2 days later, when David showed up at my office looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. "Lucy, we're facing a lawsuit that could destroy Sterling Construction. Pinnacle's insurance company is demanding $400,000 in remediation costs, plus damages for project delays. Sterling's general liability insurance would cover $200,000, leaving them personally liable for the difference. For a company already struggling with cash flow problems, that kind of exposure was potentially catastrophic. David, I'm sorry about Sterling's legal problems, but I can't help you. I'm consulting for the other side. I'm not asking you to help with the lawsuit. I'm asking you to help save Sterling Construction." He outlined a proposal that was both desperate and surprisingly thoughtful. Sterling would settle the Pinnacle lawsuit for the insurance maximum plus $50,000 from company reserves. David would step down from day-to-day operations and hire a qualified project manager to oversee all construction work. And they wanted me to consult on rebuilding Sterling's quality control systems. "David, that's a reasonable plan, but why would I help Sterling compete with my own consulting firm? Because you don't want to see Dad lose everything he spent 20 years building, even if he made mistakes about succession planning." The appeal to family loyalty was manipulative but not entirely wrong. Dad had built Sterling from nothing, and watching it collapse due to David's incompetence wouldn't satisfy me the way I'd expected. "I'll make you a counteroffer," I said after considering his proposal. "I'll consult on Sterling's quality control systems for 6 months at market rates. But David stays involved in operations under professional supervision, and any future family succession planning happens through proper business processes, not dinner table announcements." We reached an agreement that probably saved Sterling Construction from bankruptcy, while establishing clear boundaries between my consulting firm and Dad's company. Sterling would pay me $15,000 to develop quality control protocols and train their project managers on proper oversight procedures. The work was more complex than I'd anticipated. Sterling's problems weren't just about David's inexperience. They reflected systemic issues that had developed over years of informal management and inadequate documentation. I spent 3 months essentially rebuilding Sterling's project management systems from scratch. Standardized quality control checklists, contractor vetting procedures, progress reporting requirements, and client communication protocols that would prevent the kind of disasters that had nearly destroyed the company. More importantly, I worked with David to develop actual leadership skills rather than just giving him more sophisticated ways to make the same mistakes. Project planning, budget management, crew supervision, and problem-solving techniques that would let him run Sterling competently, if not brilliantly. "You're not just fixing our systems," David said during one of our training sessions. "You're teaching me how to actually run a construction company." That's exactly what I'm doing. Because if Sterling fails after I've consulted on your operations, it reflects poorly on my professional reputation. The arrangement worked better than anyone expected. Sterling's next 3 projects were completed on schedule and within budget. Their insurance premiums decreased. Client complaints stopped. David gradually developed into something resembling competent leadership. But the real test of our new relationship came in June, when I received a phone call that would determine whether the Sterling family had learned anything from their expensive mistakes. What do you think will happen next? Will Lucy's success create new family tensions or bring them closer together? Drop your predictions in the comments below and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. You know what's more satisfying than revenge? Watching people you care about finally succeed because they've learned to respect what you tried to teach them all along. By summer of my 2nd year, Sterling Construction was actually functioning like a professional company for the first time in its history. David had hired Jennifer Walsh as assistant project manager, a young woman with construction management training and enough backbone to tell him when his ideas were impractical. Dad had stepped back from day-to-day operations but stayed involved as senior advisor, focusing on client relationships rather than technical decisions. Most importantly, they were using the quality control systems I'd developed religiously. Every project had detailed planning documentation, regular progress reviews, and standardized procedures that prevented the kind of corner cutting that had nearly bankrupted them. "Lucy, I need to tell you something," David said during one of our monthly check-in meetings. "Sterling just received its highest client satisfaction scores ever, 4.8 out of 5 across all categories." The transformation was remarkable, but it had also created an unexpected problem for my own business. Sterling Construction was no longer generating the kind of management disasters that created opportunities for consulting firms like mine. My client base was evolving too. Instead of crisis management and problem solving, I was increasingly handling strategic planning and development oversight for larger projects. The reactive work that had built my reputation was being replaced by proactive management that commanded higher fees but required different skills. The Atlanta opportunity was still pending. The development group had extended their deadline twice, apparently unwilling to proceed without me as project manager. The proposed contract had grown to $18 million, enough money to establish my firm as a major player in southeastern development. But accepting Atlanta would require expanding beyond my current capacity. More employees, larger office space, and probably some kind of partnership with established contractors who could handle the actual construction work. I was wrestling with that decision when Jim Meridian called with news that changed everything. "Lucy, Meridian is being acquired by Southeastern Development Corporation. It's a friendly takeover. They want to expand into our market using our local relationships and project expertise." Southeastern was one of the largest development companies in the region, with operations in 6 states and annual revenue approaching $500 million. Their acquisition of Meridian would bring corporate resources and national connections to our local market. What does that mean for ongoing projects like Riverside? All existing contracts will be honored, but Southeastern wants to expand our development capacity significantly. They're planning to invest $50 million in regional projects over the next 3 years. $50 million in new development meant opportunities that would dwarf anything I'd previously managed. But it also meant competing with national firms that had resources and experience I couldn't match independently. "Jim, are they looking for local partners, or will they bring their own project management teams?" That's what I wanted to discuss with you. Southeastern is specifically interested in retaining local consultants who understand regional market conditions. They want to meet with you about a long-term partnership arrangement. The meeting took place the following week in Southeastern's regional headquarters, a gleaming office complex that made my converted warehouse space look embarrassingly small. Margaret Chen, Southeastern's VP of Regional Development, was a sharp, no-nonsense executive who'd clearly researched my background thoroughly. "Ms. Sterling, we've been tracking your work since the Riverside project began. Your project management approach aligns with Southeastern's quality standards, and your local relationships would be valuable for our expansion plans. What kind of partnership are you considering?" "Southeastern handles development financing and overall project coordination. You manage day-to-day construction oversight and local contractor relationships. We split management fees based on project scope and complexity. The financial terms were generous. Guaranteed minimum annual income of $200,000, plus performance bonuses that could easily double that amount. But the real opportunity was access to projects that would establish my firm as a major regional player. There was just one complication. Southeastern wanted exclusive rights to my project management services for developments over $5 million. I could continue handling smaller projects independently, but major development work would be channeled through their partnership. "Ms. Sterling, we understand this represents a significant commitment. Take whatever time you need to consider the implications." I spent 2 weeks analyzing the proposal from every possible angle. The financial security was appealing, and Southeastern's resources would let me handle projects I could never manage independently. But exclusive partnerships limited flexibility and made me dependent on someone else's business strategy. The decision became clearer after a conversation with Sarah and Mike during one of our weekly team meetings. "Lucy, we've been talking about the direction of the company," Sarah said. "If you're considering major partnerships or national expansion, we want to understand how that affects our roles and the firm's future." Mike nodded. "We joined Sterling Project Solutions because we wanted to be part of building something from the ground up. Corporate partnerships changed that dynamic significantly. Their concern was valid. Success was creating opportunities that would transform my small consulting firm into something fundamentally different. The question was whether that transformation aligned with why I'd started the business in the first place. "What if we expanded independently instead of through corporate partnerships?" I asked. "Higher risk, but complete control over our growth strategy and client relationships. How would that work financially?" Sarah asked. "We'd need significant capital investment. Probably $200,000 for equipment, personnel, and office expansion, but it would let us compete for major projects without giving up independence. The conversation continued for 2 hours, exploring alternatives that balanced growth opportunities with operational independence. By the end, we'd outlined a plan that was risky but potentially transformative. Instead of accepting Southeastern's partnership, I would expand Sterling Project Solutions into a full-service development management company. We'd hire additional staff, lease larger office space, and pursue major projects independently while maintaining the client relationships and operational control that had made us successful. The plan required a level of financial commitment that would either establish us as a major regional player or bankrupt us if we couldn't maintain sufficient project flow. But it represented everything I'd learned about the difference between building something for yourself and building something for someone else. I called Margaret Chen the following Monday to decline Southeastern's partnership offer. Ms. Sterling, can I ask what influenced your decision? I've discovered that independence is worth more to me than security. Your offer was generous, but I'd rather build something entirely my own. I respect that position. But if you change your mind, or if you'd consider project-specific partnerships in the future, please let me know. That afternoon, I signed a lease for 4,000 square feet of office space in the downtown business district. Not because I needed it immediately, but because I was committed to growing into it over the next 2 years. The expansion would require hiring 6 additional employees, investing in project management software and equipment, and probably taking on debt to maintain cash flow during the transition period. But it would also position Sterling Project Solutions to compete for the kind of projects that could establish us as one of the premier development management firms in the Southeast. 3 years after walking out of Christmas dinner with a leather planner, I was about to risk everything I'd built on the belief that independence and growth weren't mutually exclusive. The scared, angry daughter who'd needed validation from her family was gone. In her place was a businesswoman who understood that the biggest risks often led to the most significant rewards. Sometimes the biggest challenges come disguised as opportunities, and sometimes opportunities come disguised as complete disasters. I learned both lessons during the same week in October of my second year, when everything I thought I'd figured out about business and family got turned upside down. The disaster arrived first, in the form of a panicked phone call from Jennifer Walsh at Sterling Construction. Dad had collapsed during a client meeting and was being rushed to Methodist Hospital with what appeared to be a major heart attack. I met Mom and David in the emergency room waiting area, where we spent 6 hours getting updates from doctors who used phrases like significant cardiac event and substantial myocardial damage, and immediate lifestyle modifications required. Dad would survive, but his cardiologist was clear about the implications: complete retirement from active business involvement, significant reduction in stress and physical activity, and ongoing medical monitoring to prevent future episodes. Mr. Sterling, you've been operating on borrowed time for several years, Dr. Patterson explained. This heart attack was your body's way of telling you that something has to change dramatically. David looked devastated. Despite our recent improvements, Sterling Construction still depended heavily on Dad's client relationships and industry reputation. Without his involvement, the company faced an uncertain future. Doctor, what's the timeline for recovery? 6 months of complete rest, followed by very limited activity if his condition stabilizes. But Mr. Sterling will never be able to handle the stress levels associated with running a construction company. The solution seemed obvious to everyone except David, who spent the next week trying to figure out alternatives that didn't exist. Sterling needed immediate leadership from someone who understood every aspect of the operation. But David wasn't ready for that level of responsibility, despite our recent progress. Lucy, I need to ask you something I have no right to ask, Dad said during one of my hospital visits. What's that, Dad? Would you consider buying Sterling Construction? Not as a favor or family obligation, but as a legitimate business opportunity. The request surprised me more than it should have. Dad was essentially offering to sell me the company he'd given to David 2 years earlier, acknowledging that David wasn't ready to run it independently. Dad, I'm not interested in owning Sterling Construction. I've built my own company, and it's successful without the complications of family business dynamics. I understand. But Lucy, Sterling has infrastructure and client relationships that could benefit your consulting firm, and David needs mentorship from someone who actually knows how to run a construction business. I spent 3 days considering the proposal from various angles. Sterling Construction had recovered significantly since implementing my quality control systems, but it still struggled with the kind of project management challenges that I'd made my specialty solving. More importantly, acquiring Sterling would give my firm the construction capacity needed to compete for major development projects without depending on partnerships with other contractors. Dad, I'll make you a counteroffer. I'll acquire Sterling's assets and client contracts, but I'm restructuring it as a division of Sterling Project Solutions, rather than maintaining it as a separate company. The proposal was more complex than a simple acquisition. I would purchase Sterling's equipment, assume their existing contracts, and hire their crew as employees of my expanded firm. David would become project manager for the construction division, working under my overall supervision. What about the Sterling Construction name and reputation? The name becomes Sterling Development Group, reflecting our expanded services. The reputation becomes part of what we're building together. Dad agreed to an independent business appraisal, which valued Sterling's assets at $800,000. I structured the purchase as a 5-year buyout with Dad retaining 15% ownership and David guaranteed employment as construction division manager. But the real complexity came from the opportunity that arrived while we were finalizing the Sterling acquisition. Margaret Chen from Southeastern Development called with a proposal that would dwarf everything I'd been planning, a $40 million mixed-use development in downtown Atlanta, with Southeastern providing financing and development oversight, while my firm handled construction management and local contractor coordination. Ms. Sterling, this project represents exactly the kind of regional expansion Southeastern is pursuing. Your firm would be the primary contractor management company, with complete operational control over construction oversight. $40 million. The largest development project in the city's history, and Southeastern wanted my firm to manage it independently rather than as a junior partner. Margaret, that's an incredible opportunity, but the timeline would require significant expansion of our current capacity. We understand. Southeastern is prepared to provide bridge financing for personnel and equipment acquisition, with costs recovered through project management fees. The Atlanta project would require hiring 15 additional employees, leasing construction equipment, and probably relocating to Atlanta for 18 months during active construction phases. It was exactly the kind of opportunity that could establish Sterling Development Group as a major player in Southeastern commercial development. But it would also mean abandoning the regional focus that had made my firm successful, taking on debt that could bankrupt us if the project failed, and depending on Southeastern's continued support for future growth. What's your timeline for a decision? We need confirmation by December 1st. The project is scheduled to begin in February, with completion targeted for late next year. I had 6 weeks to decide whether to acquire Sterling Construction, accept the Atlanta project, or pursue some combination that could either establish us as a major development company or destroy everything I'd built over the past 2 years. The decision would determine not just my business strategy, but whether I was ready to risk the security I'd achieved for the possibility of building something much larger. That evening, I sat in my office reviewing financial projections for various expansion scenarios. Acquiring Sterling would cost $800,000, but provide immediate construction capacity. The Atlanta project would generate $2 million in management fees, but require massive expansion and relocation. Or I could continue growing Sterling Project Solutions regionally, maintaining the independence and control that had made the business successful, while avoiding the risks associated with rapid expansion. Sarah and Mike had made their preferences clear. They wanted to build something significant, but not at the cost of losing the collaborative culture we'd developed. Adding 15 new employees and managing a $40 million project would fundamentally change the nature of our company. Lucy, we trust your judgment about growth opportunities, Sarah said during our weekly planning meeting. But we want to make sure we're building something sustainable, rather than just chasing the biggest possible contracts. Her concern was valid. The construction industry was littered with small companies that had expanded too quickly, taken on projects beyond their capacity, and collapsed under the weight of their own ambition. But it was also an industry where opportunities like Atlanta came along once in a career, if you were lucky enough to have the right reputation at the right time. I had 3 weeks to make a decision that would define the next phase of my career and determine whether Sterling Development Group would become a major regional player or remain a successful local consulting firm. The stakes had never been higher, and the margin for error had never been smaller. You know what's terrifying about success? Eventually, you have to decide whether you're building something that lasts or just proving a point to people who underestimated you. By November of my second year, I was facing exactly that choice. And the answer would determine everything. I declined the Atlanta project. The decision surprised everyone, including me. $40 million in development contracts, the chance to establish Sterling Development Group as a major Southeastern player, and validation that I could compete with the biggest firms in commercial construction. But sitting in my office at midnight, reviewing financial projections and expansion requirements, I realized that accepting Atlanta would mean building someone else's vision of success rather than my own. Margaret, I appreciate Southeastern's confidence in our capabilities, I told her during our final conversation. But this project doesn't align with our strategic priorities for sustainable growth. Ms. Sterling, can I ask what influenced your decision? The financial terms are extraordinarily generous. The financial terms are excellent, but success isn't just about revenue. It's about building something that reflects your values and maintains the culture that made you successful in the first place. Instead of Atlanta, I chose something more challenging and potentially more rewarding, building Sterling Development Group into the premier regional development management company, maintaining complete independence while competing for the most sophisticated projects in our market. The Sterling Construction acquisition closed in December, exactly 2 years after the Christmas dinner that started everything. The combined company, now officially Sterling Development Group, had 12 employees, annual revenue approaching $800,000, and the capacity to handle projects up to $15 million independently. More importantly, we had something most development companies lacked: complete integration of project management, quality control, and construction oversight under unified leadership. Clients weren't coordinating between multiple contractors and consultants. They were working with one company that handled everything from initial planning through final occupancy. "Lucy, this is exactly what the market needs," Jim Meridian said during our first project meeting under the new structure. One point of contact, one set of standards, one company accountable for results. The integration wasn't seamless initially. David struggled with reporting to me after years of considering himself Sterling's leader, even though his actual management skills had improved significantly. The construction crew needed time to adapt to my firm's documentation requirements and quality control standards. But within 6 months, Sterling Development Group was delivering results that neither company could have achieved independently. Projects completed ahead of schedule, budgets that consistently came in under estimate, and client satisfaction scores that were attracting referrals from across the region. The real validation came in the spring of my 3rd year, when we were approached by 3 different development companies wanting to discuss partnership arrangements similar to what Southeastern had proposed. "Ms. Sterling, we've been tracking Sterling Development Group's performance record," said Robert Kim from Atlantic Development Partners. "We're planning significant expansion into your market, and we'd like to discuss a long-term partnership for project management services." Atlantic was offering guaranteed minimum contracts worth $2 million annually, plus expansion opportunities that could reach $5 million within 3 years. Financial security that would let me stop worrying about maintaining project flow and focus entirely on operational excellence. I turned them down too. Not because the terms weren't attractive, but because I'd finally understood what I was actually building. Sterling Development Group wasn't just a consulting firm or construction company. It was proof that you could maintain complete independence while competing at the highest levels of commercial development. "Lucy, are you sure about declining these partnership offers?" Sarah asked during one of our quarterly planning meetings. "The financial security would let us take more risks with innovative projects." "Sarah, we already have financial security. What we'd be giving up is independence, and independence is what makes us attractive to partners in the first place." By summer of my 3rd year, Sterling Development Group was managing 12 major projects simultaneously, with a waiting list of clients who wanted our services. We'd moved to larger office space, hired 8 additional employees, and established relationships with suppliers and subcontractors that gave us preferential pricing and scheduling. Most importantly, we'd developed a reputation for delivering exactly what we promised, when we promised it, at the price we quoted. In an industry notorious for cost overruns and timeline delays, that reliability was worth more than any partnership arrangement. The personal satisfaction was even greater than the professional success. Dad had recovered enough to visit our office occasionally, always impressed by what Sterling Development Group had become. "Lucy, this is extraordinary," he said during one of his visits. "You've built something much bigger than what Sterling Construction ever was." "Dad, I built something different than Sterling Construction. Bigger isn't always better, but better is always worth pursuing." David had evolved into an excellent construction manager under proper supervision, finally developing the leadership skills Dad had always hoped he'd acquire. He was never going to be an entrepreneur or strategic thinker, but he'd become competent at managing crews and coordinating with subcontractors. "Lucy, I need to tell you something I should have said 2 years ago," David said during one of our monthly review meetings. "I was never ready to run Sterling Construction. Dad wanted me to be ready, and I wanted to be ready. But wanting isn't the same as capability. David, you're ready now. That's what matters. Only because you taught me how to actually do the job instead of just hoping I'd figure it out." Mom still didn't entirely understand how I'd gone from the support staff daughter to CEO of a regional development company, but she was proud in her own way. She'd even started bragging to her friends about my success, though she still occasionally asked when I was going to think about settling down and starting a family. The leather planner Dad had given me that Christmas still sat on my desk, not as a reminder of humiliation, but as evidence of how wrong people can be about your potential when they're too focused on their own limitations to see your possibilities. But the real milestone came in August when Sterling Development Group received something I'd never expected: A request from Morrison & Associates to acquire our project management division. Lucy, we want to offer you $8 million for Sterling Development Group's client contracts and operational systems, Elizabeth Morrison explained during our meeting. You'd continue as division president with complete autonomy, but with Morrison's resources and bonding capacity behind you. $8 million. Enough money to secure my financial future and establish me as one of the most successful entrepreneurs in regional construction history. I turned them down. Not because $8 million wasn't life-changing money, but because I'd learned that some things are worth more than money. Independence, control over your own decisions, and the satisfaction of building something entirely your own aren't for sale at any price. Elizabeth, I appreciate the offer, but Sterling Development Group isn't for sale. We're not interested in being acquired or becoming anyone's division. Can I ask why? The financial terms are extraordinarily generous. Because we've built something that works exactly the way we want it to work. Why would we want to change that? 3 years after walking out of Christmas dinner with wounded pride and a determination to prove everyone wrong, I'd built something that exceeded every measure of success I'd originally imagined. But more importantly, I'd learned the difference between building something to prove a point and building something because you love the process of creating it. Have you ever reached a point where you realized that everything you thought you wanted was actually just the beginning of what you were capable of achieving? That's exactly where I found myself in the fall of my 3rd year, when an opportunity presented itself that would test everything I'd learned about ambition, family, and the true meaning of success. The call came from an unexpected source. Patricia Webb, the employment attorney who'd helped me navigate the non-compete issues when I'd started my consulting firm. She was representing a consortium of regional business leaders who were developing something called the Southeastern Construction Innovation Center. Lucy, they want to discuss a leadership opportunity that might interest you. Are you available for a meeting next week? The Innovation Center was designed to be a training and resource facility for construction companies throughout the Southeast. Advanced project management education, new technology demonstrations, sustainability consulting, and business development services for firms wanting to modernize their operations. We need someone to serve as executive director, explained Dr. Michael Harrison, the consortium's chairman and president of Regional Business Development Corporation. Someone with practical construction experience, proven management capabilities, and the credibility to work with companies ranging from small family operations to major regional contractors. The position would oversee a $15 million facility with 60 employees, annual operating budget of $8 million, and programs that could influence construction practices throughout a 5-state region. It was the kind of role that could establish me as one of the most influential people in Southeastern construction. Dr. Harrison, that sounds like an incredible opportunity, but I'm not interested in leaving Sterling Development Group to run someone else's organization. We anticipated that response. What if the Innovation Center contracted with Sterling Development Group to provide executive leadership and operational management? You'd maintain your company while overseeing center operations under a long-term management agreement. The arrangement would guarantee Sterling Development Group $3 million annually in management contracts, while positioning us as the premier construction consulting firm in the Southeast. Financial security and professional recognition that exceeded anything I'd previously imagined. But it would also require dedicating most of my time to the Innovation Center rather than growing Sterling Development Group, essentially trading direct business ownership for institutional leadership. What's the timeline for this decision? We need to finalize leadership arrangements by December. The center is scheduled to open in 18 months, with preliminary programs beginning next fall. I had 2 months to decide whether to accept the most prestigious opportunity of my career or continue focusing on building my own company into something even more significant. The decision became more complicated when I received a phone call that brought everything full circle. Bill Harrison from Pinnacle Financial, the developer whose problems had first demonstrated the market demand for independent project management consulting. Lucy, I have a proposition that might interest you. Pinnacle is establishing a real estate development division, and we want to discuss a long-term partnership for project management services. Pinnacle was planning to invest $200 million in commercial development over the next 5 years, creating opportunities that would dwarf anything Sterling Development Group had previously managed. We don't want to acquire your company or limit your independence, Bill explained. We want to establish Sterling Development Group as our preferred project management partner, with guaranteed minimum contracts and expansion opportunities that could make you the largest independent development management firm in the Southeast. $200 million in development projects. The Innovation Center leadership position. Partnership offers from 3 major development companies. Success was creating opportunities faster than I could evaluate them, each more significant than what I'd been managing just 6 months earlier. But the most important conversation happened at an unexpected location. Sunday dinner at my parents' house. The first time our entire family had gathered since Christmas dinner 3 years earlier. "Lucy, we're so proud of what you've accomplished," Mom said as we sat around the same dining room table where this whole journey had begun. "Sterling Development Group is exactly the kind of company this city needs." Dad nodded. "I've been telling everyone about your success. You've built something much more significant than what I ever accomplished with Sterling Construction. Dad, you built the foundation that made everything else possible. Sterling Construction taught me how the business actually works. But you built something better than what I envisioned." Sterling Development Group is what I always hoped Sterling Construction could become, but I never had the vision or capability to create it. David had been quiet through most of dinner, but finally spoke up. "Lucy, I need to ask you something. Are you happy with what you've built?" The question surprised me. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've achieved everything you set out to prove when you left Sterling. You've built a successful company, earned recognition throughout the industry, and demonstrated capabilities that none of us appreciated 3 years ago. But are you actually happy, or are you still trying to prove something?" His insight was more perceptive than I'd expected. 3 years of success had validated my capabilities beyond any doubt, but somewhere along the way, proving myself had evolved into something different. A genuine love for building and managing complex projects that created value for clients and opportunities for employees. "David, I think I'm finally building something because I love doing it rather than because I need to prove I can." "Then what's your next challenge?" "You've essentially mastered regional development management. What comes after success?" The question forced me to articulate something I'd been thinking about for months. Sterling Development Group had grown beyond what one person could manage effectively, but I wasn't ready to give up operational control to pursue larger opportunities. "I think the next challenge is figuring out how to scale expertise without losing quality. How to grow a company that can handle $200 million development programs while maintaining the attention to detail that made us successful. Have you considered that might require bringing in partners who complement your skills rather than just expanding your current operations?" David's question identified the core issue I'd been avoiding. At some point, continued growth would require sharing control with people who brought capabilities I lacked: financial management expertise, marketing and business development skills, technology systems that could support much larger operations. The conversation continued for 3 hours, covering everything from business strategy to family relationships to the lessons we'd all learned about success and failure over the past 3 years. By the end of the evening, I'd gained clarity about both the opportunities I was considering and the direction I wanted Sterling Development Group to grow. The Innovation Center position was prestigious, but would limit my focus to institutional leadership rather than direct business building. The Pinnacle partnership was financially attractive but would make me dependent on one client for most of my revenue. What I really wanted was to continue building Sterling Development Group into something that could compete with the largest firms while maintaining the independence and quality that had made us successful. 2 weeks later, I announced my decision to decline both the Innovation Center and Pinnacle opportunities. Instead, Sterling Development Group would pursue controlled expansion that maintained our operational focus while building capacity to handle increasingly complex projects. "We're going to become the best development management company in the Southeast," I told our team during our quarterly planning meeting. "Not the largest, not the most prestigious, but the best at delivering exactly what we promise to clients who value quality over everything else." The decision represented everything I'd learned about the difference between building something for external validation and building something because you're passionate about the process of creating it. 3 years after walking out of Christmas dinner with a leather planner, I'd finally discovered what success actually meant to me: complete independence, operational excellence, and the satisfaction of building something entirely my own that created value for everyone involved. I'm Lucy, and I'm 30 years old now. 3 years ago, my family handed their construction company to my younger brother and gave me a leather planner with my name on it. Today, I'm standing in the conference room of Sterling Development Group, my company, preparing to announce the completion of our 22nd major project and the establishment of our operations in 3 southeastern states. The conference room where this journey started was Sterling Construction's cramped office space, where Dad held Monday morning meetings with a crew of 12. This conference room seats 50 people comfortably and overlooks a city skyline that includes 7 buildings we've managed development for. Sterling Development Group isn't just a consulting firm anymore. We're a comprehensive development management company that handles projects from initial concept through final occupancy. We have 41 employees, offices in 3 cities, and a project portfolio worth over $150 million. But the real measure of success isn't in the numbers. It's in the lesson I learned about the difference between wanting recognition for work you're already doing and creating work that's worthy of recognition. The Riverside Phase 2 project was completed 6 months ahead of schedule and came in 14% under budget. It won state awards for innovative construction management and sustainable development practices. More importantly, it established Sterling Development Group as the kind of company that developers seek out rather than simply consider. Dad officially retired 18 months ago, selling his remaining equity stake for enough money to buy that condo in Florida and the boat he'd talked about for 20 years. He visits quarterly, always amazed by what Sterling Development Group has become and occasionally admitting he never could have imagined the scale of what I've built. "Lucy, this is extraordinary," he said during his last visit. "You've created something I never dreamed possible when you were organizing my filing cabinets at 14. David works for Sterling Development Group now as Construction Operations Manager, reporting to me but running day-to-day construction activities with competence that took 3 years to develop. He's good at what he does, managing crews, coordinating with subcontractors, ensuring quality control standards are maintained consistently. Our relationship is better now than it's ever been, built on mutual respect rather than family obligation. David finally understands that leadership requires earning authority through competence, not inheriting it through birthright. I was never cut out to run my own company," he admitted during our last performance review. "But I'm excellent at running operations for someone who actually knows how to lead." The expansion happened gradually and deliberately. First Atlanta, then Charlotte, then Nashville, markets where our reputation for delivering complex projects on schedule and within budget attracted clients who valued reliability over low bids. Each expansion required hiring local talent who understood regional market conditions while maintaining the operational standards that distinguished Sterling Development Group from larger competitors. Project managers who could adapt our systems to local requirements, quality control specialists who could maintain consistency across multiple locations, business development professionals who could build relationships with developers and contractors in new markets. "We're not trying to be the biggest development management company," I explained to our regional managers during our annual planning meeting. "We're trying to be the best at what we do, and size will follow quality naturally." The approach worked. Sterling Development Group's reputation spread through industry networks faster than any marketing campaign could have achieved. Developers who'd worked with us on one project specifically requested our services for their next developments. Contractors competed to be selected for our projects because they knew we managed timelines and budgets professionally. Most importantly, we'd maintained the collaborative culture that made people want to work for Sterling Development Group, rather than just collecting paychecks while looking for better opportunities elsewhere. The real breakthrough came 2 years ago, when we were selected to manage the largest mixed-use development in Nashville's history, a $30 million project that included retail, office, and residential components on 40 acres of prime real estate. Sterling Development Group was our first choice, the developer explained during the contract signing. "Your reputation for managing complex projects without drama or surprises is exactly what we need for something this ambitious." The Nashville project established us as a major player in southeastern development, attracting opportunities from developers who previously would have only considered national firms. Not because we were the cheapest option, but because we were the most reliable. 6 months ago, we opened our 4th office in Birmingham, expanding Sterling Development Group's operations to cover most major southeastern markets. Annual revenue exceeded $12 million, with profit margins that reflected the premium pricing our reputation commanded. But success also created challenges I hadn't anticipated. Managing 4 offices required delegation that sometimes felt like losing control. Projects in different markets required local knowledge I didn't possess directly. Growth meant hiring people who shared our values but brought different perspectives about how to achieve them. "Lucy, you've built something that's bigger than what one person can manage," Sarah observed during one of our leadership team meetings. "At some point, you'll need to decide whether you want to remain hands-on with individual projects or focus on strategic leadership for the entire company." She was right. Sterling Development Group had reached the point where continued growth required different skills than the ones that had made us successful initially. Strategic planning rather than tactical problem solving. Organizational leadership rather than project management. Business development rather than client relations. The transition wasn't easy, learning to trust other people's judgment about decisions I'd previously made personally. Accepting that delegation sometimes meant accepting approaches that were different from but not necessarily inferior to my own methods. But it was also liberating. Focusing on strategic direction rather than daily operations gave me perspective about what Sterling Development Group could become over the next 5 years. Not just a larger version of what we already were, but something fundamentally different. A company that shaped how development projects were managed throughout the Southeast. The leather planner Dad gave me that Christmas still sits on my desk, sharing space with architectural drawings for projects that wouldn't exist if my family had recognized my capabilities 3 years ago. It's not a reminder of humiliation anymore. It's evidence of how limitations other people place on your potential become irrelevant when you stop asking for their permission to succeed. 3 years ago, I thought success meant getting credit for work. I was already doing well. Now I understand that real success means creating work that didn't exist before you decided to build it. The angry, hurt daughter who left Christmas dinner has been replaced by someone who understands that the best revenge isn't proving other people wrong. It's building something so compelling that their opinion of your potential becomes completely irrelevant. Tomorrow we break ground on our largest project ever, a $50 million development in Atlanta that will take 3 years to complete. Next year, we'll probably expand into Texas markets. In 5 years, Sterling Development Group will likely be operating in 8 states, with annual revenue approaching $50 million. But today, I'm grateful for the Christmas dinner that taught me the most valuable lesson of my career. Sometimes the people who underestimate you do you the biggest favor by forcing you to discover what you're capable of building when you stop waiting for their approval. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about turning life's biggest disappointments into your greatest victories. And remember, sometimes the best gift is the one that forces you to unwrap your own potential. The leather planner is still there, but now it shares desk space with contracts and architectural plans for projects that represent everything I learned about the difference between building someone else's dreams and creating your own.